Hello everybody and welcome back. Today's episode is going to be one that I've had a couple of people ask for, so I'm going to make it, and depending on what kind of feedback I get, I'll make either more of these or we'll never make one again, depending. So do let me know. What this episode is going to do is I'm going to go to a specific nation and a specific tech tree line, and I'm going to give an overview of that line. So I'm going to talk about the ships in the line, which are good, which aren't so good, and what are the things I've noticed while playing them. Typically speaking, I'll only do a tech tree line if I've played pretty much all the ships in the line, and only then will I actually make one of these videos. So today I'm going to start with the Japanese battleship line, which overall, there are a lot of good ships in the line, and as a line, it's pretty darn good, although there are a few ships that could be considered stinkers. So let's get started. First up is the Kawachi. This is the Japanese Tier 3 battleship. And the Japanese battleship line doesn't really start off all that great with this ship. The Kawachi can be okay if you're pretty experienced, but if it's the first time playing a battleship, she is rough. The Kawachi is not very good in terms of range. In fact, you might find that a lot of cruisers would even outrange you. So that's the first real issue. The second is that the dispersion on the Kawachi is pretty rough. You could fire at a target reasonably close and you'll just watch your shell sort of disappear all over the place and they won't really hit anything. So the Kawachi definitely has its weaknesses. However, she also has some things that make her not so bad. I mean, one of the things is that her turret placement is actually quite interesting, and it provides certain advantages at times. So let's say you're fighting another ship, and you've got one side of your guns pointed in one direction, and you're fighting something, and then suddenly something else pops up on the other side. Well, with a battleship like, let's say, the South Carolina, where all the guns are in the middle and all facing one direction, you would have to rotate all the turrets to get guns on the other side. With the Kawachi, you could just turn your mouse around, look in the other direction, and you at least have two turrets there available. So the placement isn't bad, and it can provide certain advantages. Also, the Kawachi, when fully upgraded, goes 20 knots, which isn't terrible for a Tier 3 battleship. However, overall, when compared to, say, the American Tier 3 battleship, the South Carolina, I do have to say that the South Carolina is better than the Kawachi, and that the ship just isn't all that good. So finally, you get out of the Kawachi and you move on to the Tier 4 Japanese battleship, the Myogi, only to find that, the suckiness sort of continues. In fact, the Myogi, I think, is even worse than the Kawachi, because you've got to fight even higher tier things. And the Myogi, I can say, is probably the worst battleship on the Japanese line. The Myogi has her advantages too. I mean, she's fast. She's a battlecruiser. When fully upgraded, she is quite zippy. The guns are a nice caliber. They are 356 millimeters, which means that she can at least penetrate things. However, the Myogi has only 6 barrels, which means every time you fire, it's only 6 shells. If those 6 shells were really accurate, then this ship would be pretty darn good, except the Myogi's dispersion is atrocious. Trying to hit anything at range is, well, a lot of it depends on luck. The main battery firing range of the Myogi with fully upgraded is pretty good, but like my experiences with the ship in-game is that the range is almost never that useful, just because at long range you rarely ever hit anything. Even up close you struggle with hitting stuff. So Myogi, not very good, possibly the worst battleship on the Japanese line. But fear not, things are about to get better. One more thing though. Also, when you compare the Myogi to a Wyoming, there's a really big mismatch there. While the Wyoming has smaller guns, she's got way more of them. And so a Wyoming finds it probably easier to kill things like cruisers and stuff just because she's got so many shells that she can just fire off in one direction. Myogi, not so much, and of course, like I mentioned earlier, the dispersion definitely lets it down. However, once you get past the first two ships of the Japanese battleship line, and you move on to the Congo, things definitely improve. And the Congo, even at the very beginning on the stock hull, is already decent. Fantastic range, alright speed, good guns, dispersion's pretty darn decent, but of course once you get the Congo fully upgraded, then she's an excellent tier 5 battleship. and really has very, very few flaws. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go and fully upgrade the Congo here. I'm going to slap on the sea hull, I'm going to throw on the FCS module, and I'm going to throw on the engine, and then you can see the Congo becomes a very, very solid tier 5 battleship. Solid amount of HP, good guns, and dispersion is really, really nice on the Congo guns. Range is fantastic, 21.2 kilometers, substantially better than the range you're going to get on the New York, and allows you to engage things quite a ways away, and also allows the Congo, interestingly enough, that if you run into a higher tier battle, to still remain somewhat viable because you have that range, and of course you have that dispersion to actually land your hits. Aside from all of that, the speed of the Congo is also fantastic, going 30 knots. I mean, what else can I say? She's a very, very solid ship. And if, played well, this ship is competitive pretty much all the way up to tier 7 even. So the beginning of a pretty solid line of ships starting at the Congo. Once you move up to tier 6, however, there's a bit of a hiccup. You move up to tier 6 and you get the Fuso. And the Fuso is renowned for having a massive amount of firepower. But the stock Fuso, for some really strange reason, whether this is a bug or this is just a mistake in encoding or something like that, the Fuso starts off with a dismal 13.2 kilometer range, which means at tier 6, a Cleveland is going to be outranging you. And so the stock hull of the Fuso is absolutely painful. But you don't actually have to get the FCS for the Fuso to become viable. All you have to do is research the B hull. And what happens is the minute you research the B hull and you have the awesome pagoda-like structure, the range of the Fuso immediately recovers to go to 19.8 kilometers. The Fuso, however, is also a little bit slower than the Congo, as she is a full-fledged battleship and not a battle cruiser. So, at first, without the engine upgrade, she's a bit slow. Once you throw on the engine upgrade, the Fuso has reasonable speed. Mind you, when I say slow, she's not exactly all that slow, considering the New Mexico on the American line isn't really going all that much faster, even with fully upgraded, mind you. Finally, if you upgrade to the Sea Hull, and of course you upgrade the actual fire control system, the Fuso's range extends out to 21.8 kilometers, and of course with the massive numbers of shells that you can spit out with every salvo, the Fuso is quite good, and even viable all the way up to tier 8 if well played. There is an advantage that the Fuso has over the New Mexico, and that primarily lies in, yes, it outranges the New Mexico, but it primarily outguns the New Mexico in terms of rate of fire. The New Mexico's rate of fire when fully upgraded is 1.8 rounds a minute. The Fuso, 2.1, which means that in a straight up fight, your damage output per minute is substantially better than what you can get out of the New Mexico. So overall, the Fuso is an absolutely solid tier 6 battleship. She has got good HP, decent armor, good guns, good dispersion, good range of fire, except for the stock hull, pretty okay speed, and overall just a fantastic tier 6 battleship. Very, very competitive, even if you happen to land in tier 7 or 8 games. From the Fuso to the Nagato is where usually for some players is this huge drop in performance, because all of a sudden they have a ship that they just don't do well in. And that's primarily because the Nagato is a vastly different ship when it comes to style of play compared to the Fuso. The Nagato depends a lot on how well you aim and how well you're able to lead your targets and how well you're able to hit your citadels. And that's because the Nagato is much more of an accurate sort of sniper compared to the shotgun method of play for the Fuso. The Fuso can be played in a way where you just sort of launch salvos of shells and sort of pray to RNG a little bit and hope that you're going to land something. The Nagato, you've only got 8 shells. They're very, very, very good tight shots, but if you just don't aim well, you will never hit your target. And so that's the main difference between the two. However, if you aim really, really well, the Nagato is a fantastic ship. She is solid all the way around. Although, the stock hull does have its issues. The stock hull has 49,000 HP, which isn't a lot, and it's got these sort of substandard shells. However, When you upgrade from the stock hull to the Nagato's B hull, there's a massive improvement all around. First of all, 65,000 HP, so a huge increase in HP. And second, you have these awesome 410mm armor-piercing Type 91 shells, and they are substantially better than the stock shells that you get with the stock hull. So for the Nagato, definitely make sure you research the hull first. Once the hull is done, you can of course get the engine, which will increase your speed from a pretty dismal 22.3 knots up to a pretty respectable 25 knots. Everything else about the Nagato is pretty good. Armor's pretty decent, speed's pretty decent, dispersion is fantastic, HP pool is great, especially when compared to something like the Colorado, and of course the Nagato is famous for its amazing secondaries, and so it allows you up close and personal against other ships like destroyers or battleships that you're brawling with. It allows for your secondaries to be doing some damage as well. Rate of fire is also a little bit different compared to the previous ship, the Fuso, which had 2.1 rate of fire. The Nagato has 1.9, which might throw off the timing for people a little bit, so you got to be a little bit more careful of that. Compared to the Colorado, it's also a tiny bit slower, 1.9 versus 2.0. So up close, the Colorado has a slight edge in terms of rate of fire. However, if you angle properly and you fire your shots correctly, you're bound to do quite a bit of damage, as the guns are absolutely fantastic in terms of penetration, in terms of citadel damage. It's just amazing. So the Nagato, great ship, but does require skill to play, and that is very, very different than the Fuso, which even if you aren't that skilled, you can get away with it just because of its amazing shotgun spread and the number of shells that it fires. Moving on to Tier 8, into possibly one of the best battleships in the game, tier for tier, the Amagi. The Amagi is sort of like a Nagato and a Fuso decided to take all their good parts and put it into one ship, and that's kind of what the Amagi is. She's fantastic. Her gun dispersion is a little bit more like the Fuso in terms of the fact that it's a little bit more dispersed. Still pretty tight, but a little bit more dispersed. However, she's got the extra turret, so 2 extra guns. So again, a little bit more like the Fuso. You can kind of get away with it a little bit more. In terms of speed, she's fantastic. 28.1 stock. If you get the engine, it's 30 knots. Her armor is pretty good when it's angled. An angled Amagi is actually quite hard to penetrate, so definitely make sure you are angling with the ship. Secondaries are still pretty nice, very, very similar to the Nagato, although a little bit more spread out as well. If you compare to the Nagato, her secondaries are still good. There's still a lot of them, but sometimes I just find the Nagatos to be a little bit better, although that could just be my RNG being really, really poor. So your mileage may vary with the secondaries on the Amagi. In terms of range, the Amagi isn't really all that great. Fully upgraded with everything, the Amagi has 19.9 kilometer range, so not as good as some of the other ships at this tier. However, it's still okay, especially since a lot of the battleship fights do tend to come in a little bit closer. Once again, very, very similar to the Nagato, the Amagi is absolutely dependent on just getting to the B hull as quickly as possible. So once you get to the B hull, first of all, you get a bit more HP, but more importantly, again, it's the shell difference. Once you upgrade to the B hull, you get that 410mm Type 91 shell, which are fantastic shells for the battleship. And so overall, the Amagi, definitely a very, very solid ship and an absolute keeper. So this is sort of 4 battleships, starting the Congo and the Amagi, on the Japanese battleship line that is really, really, really solid. Except once you finish the Amagi, you run into this disappointing thing called the Izumo. The Izumo is just not all that great. She's just not all that great. She's an awkward ship to play, and especially when you come from the Amagi to the Izumo, it's almost like what happened to this awesome ship that I was playing. The Izumo's weird, and it's made worse by the fact that the stock hull, first of all, has the if you look at the stock hull, it's got the crappy Type 90 shells, and you really need the B hull to get the better Type 91 shells. But even with the B hull, which was good for the Nagato and the Amagi, just getting the B hull, the Izumo absolutely needs the FCS upgrade. When I played with the Izumo, the one thing I found is that, and I went, by the way, first for the B hull, is that with just the B hull, without the FCS, I couldn't seem to hit anything. It wasn't my aim. It was just every time I fired, I looked at my dispersion, and it was like, dear God, there was like hundreds of meters in like vertical dispersion or something. Just like the shots would never go anywhere. I could not hit a battleship at like 13 kilometers because my shots were just forward, back, everywhere. But the minute I got the FCS upgrade, I noticed an immediate change in the Izumo's pattern in terms of the way that the dispersion seemed to go. It immediately seemed to get tighter, seemed to become more horizontal and less vertical, made it easier to hit stuff. So with the Izumo, absolute things you have to get in terms of the upgrades is the B hull and the FCS. So if you were playing through all the other ships and you didn't really spend your free experience, I would definitely say if you could save your free experience for the B hull and the FCS on the Izumo, your life would be a little bit better. The Izumo also kind of trains you for the Yamato style of play. You know, you sort of sit there, bow on to something, and you fire. The Izumo, when you're bow on, is insanely tanky. Very, very few things will be able to penetrate you. Very similar to a Yamato in that sense. Secondaries on the Izumo are also fantastic. She's got sort of the Yamato secondaries, and if you can get up to the Sea Hull, you get a ton of them. And not only do you have a ton of them, their range is fantastic. If you get the proper captain's skills, the proper modules, you can fire your secondaries out to like 10-kilometer range. It's absolutely amazing. The major weakness for me when I was playing the Izumo, aside from the somewhat awkward turret layout and everything, is that I found that the Izumo just turned like a brick. I don't know, the Izumo just seemed to turn horribly, and she just turned like a brick. She had no ability to turn whatsoever. So you have to be super cautious when you're playing the Izumo, especially when you're up against destroyers, because this thing just does not turn very well. And yeah, I mean, she's playable. I wouldn't say she's like the worst ship on the Japanese line. That I think is pretty much safe for the Myogi in my opinion, but still not the best ship. But like I said earlier, if you get the B hull and you get the FCS, she is better. And finally, once you get to the end of the Japanese battleship tree, you get to this beautiful thing, the Yamato. And what can I say about the Yamato? Absolute god tier ship. The way that she is right now, the Yamato is just absolutely amazing. Amazing health pool. If she's bow onto you, practically impenetrable. Her guns, amazing accuracy, amazing penetration, do fantastic amounts of damage. Amazing range as well, even stock. A is not as good as the Montana, but still reasonably good. Speed is pretty good, 27 knots. She turns reasonably quickly. Yamato is just, oh yeah, and she's got, of course, got the absolute god tier heal. The Yamato's heal heals 729 HP per second without the flag. If you throw on the flag, she heals like even more. So Yamato, absolutely best battleship in the game, in my opinion, right now. We'll have to see what other nations' battleships at tier 10 look like in the future, but for now, this one is the king, the god, the holy deity of World of Warships battleships. And if you are going down a tech tree line looking for the best tier 10 battleship, this is it. Japanese battleship Yamato. Absolutely phenomenal. Oh yeah, of course, and she also has those amazing secondaries as well, as like I mentioned for the Izumo. She's got those things too. So definitely a very, very worthwhile ship. So if you're thinking about going down a battleship line and you want a good battleship line to go down, I would definitely say go down the Japanese battleship line. There are just fewer ships on it that are bad, and there are just a lot of ships on the line that are absolutely top of their class. So hopefully this overview has been helpful to you, and hopefully you've decided or not decided to go down this Japanese battleship line. Let me know what you all think. Let me know if you want more of these. Aside from all that, you all have a good one, and I'll talk to you again all soon.